Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Success Looks Like Me Innovation Career Panel. Plan for today is first a warm welcome for all of you. I'm Dr. Jennifer Winward, the founder and CEO of Winward Academy, and it is my pleasure to be with you all today and to welcome our esteemed panelists. Today, we are going to hear from two world-class researchers representing the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. I'm going to post a link now in the chat if you just give me 1 second here. And it's a link to all of their bios for all of the panelists actually who are going to be, oops, sorry, I sent it just to the panelists. Let me make sure I send it to all of you. There we go. So there's a link in the chat now with a link to PDFs with the bios for each panelist. So please feel free to read more about them as they're going to be answering questions. And then after chatting today with Dr. Kamariza and Dr. Raymond, we are going to welcome them back at the end for Q&A with questions from you, our attendees. Now, this career panel is proudly presented by the Carol Kimmelman Athletic and Academic Campus. For those of you who might not be familiar with the project, the Kimmelman campus is going to be a world-class academic and athletic campus serving thousands of students and families from underserved communities, thanks to partnerships with the U.S. Tennis Association, Tiger Woods' charity, the TGR Foundation, Disney, ESPN, the incredibly generous Karsh family, and Winward Academy. On behalf of all of us supporting the Kimmelman campus, we want to thank our nonprofit and school partners for collaborating with us today and for participating. Now, both innovation panelists today are joining us from the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. So we do want to give a very special thank you to the Broad Institute and to Young Women in Bio for partnering with us for this innovation panel today. Next, I'd like to introduce your esteemed panelists, give you just kind of a quick background on each of them. So today we'll be joined first by Dr. Kamariza. Dr. Kamariza currently works as a postdoctoral scientist at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. She is also a junior fellow in the Society of Fellows at Harvard University. She earned her bachelor's in biochemistry and chemistry from UC San Diego, which is actually my alma mater as well. She got her master's in molecular and cell biology at UC Berkeley, her Ph.D. in biology at Stanford, where she also developed a new diagnostic technology for the rapid and simple detection of tuberculosis that was actually translated into a public benefit corporation. And very cool, in 2017, she was named one of the world's most powerful women by Fortune magazine. So we're very lucky to have her with us today. After we speak with Dr. Kamariza, we're going to then talk with Dr. Raymond. Dr. Raymond is a research scientist at the Center for the Development of Therapeutics, also at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Biology and Philosophy from Temple University, got his PhD in Biological Chemistry from the University of Michigan, and is now doing his postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard Medical School. He's also spent the past 10 years mentoring high school and college students to help them pursue fulfilling careers in STEM fields. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kamariza to please turn on her camera and microphone to join me, and we will jump into questions for her. Good morning, Dr. Kamariza. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and for the kind introduction.
Absolutely. So we'll go ahead and jump in with a question kind of more about your personal journey. So you have, quite an extensive resume, and I'd love for our students to learn a little bit more about kind of how you got started. So if you could maybe share more about your path from Burundi to UC San Diego, Berkeley, Stanford, and now Harvard and the Broad Institute.
Sure. As you just said, I was born and raised in Burundi. It's a small landlocked country in East Africa. And when I was a teenager, about 17 years old, I moved to the United States where I finished my high school. And typical immigrant story, I started going to community college to be able to catch up with my education, and as well as just adapt to a new country that I had just moved in. It's at the community college at San Diego Mesa College that I this sort of like started flourishing my interest in science and chemistry particularly, and I have to thank my teachers and professors at Mesa College to sort of witness the potential and be able to sort of nurture it. And so actually, with the help of my chemistry teacher, my introduction to chemistry teacher at Mesa College, I was able to apply, and then I transferred to UC San Diego in my second year. And so at UCSD, I discovered a world of opportunities for undergraduate research. And I was part of a National Institute of Health and Mark scholars who are given scholarship essentially to do research outside of classes, and then they can sponsor your education at UCSD. So I did that for about 2 years. And because of the program, we had to be, part of a lab, learn how to do biology, how to work with cuvettes and flasks and grow cultures in the lab. And that gave me a breadth of experience to be a scientist. And it kind of grew my passion for science. I sort of discovered that that's what I enjoyed doing. I thoroughly enjoyed the community I was in, the other students who were part of the labs. And that's how I decided to go do a PhD, to go to graduate school. And again, the mentors and sponsors at that time were invaluable in order for me to see myself as being a scientist. Because the image I had of a scientist when I was growing up wasn't someone that looked like me. And I was fortunate at UCSD that I had a Black woman professor who was my biology professor, and she essentially served as a role model for me to be able to imagine a future where I could be a scientist. Anyway, so I applied. I got into UC Berkeley, and I was very thrilled to stay in California where it's warm. And I moved to Berkeley, where I spent the next 2 years developing sort of my skill set in chemistry and chemical biology, and growing my network. And so while I was at Berkeley, my advisor actually had a wonderful opportunity where she was being hired to move to Stanford University. And when that was happening, I had the option of staying at Berkeley or moving with her. And I ended up moving with her because at that time, my project was taking a turn towards a more applied side, a more medical side. And Berkeley doesn't have a hospital or a school of medicine, and Stanford does. And I felt that I could leverage the community at Stanford in medicine, particularly, to be able to take me to my next step in my PhD career. And I did just that. And it turned out to be a wonderful decision, because when I moved to Stanford, I not only met doctors and clinicians that do clinical trials all the time, but I was also able to broaden my network internationally. The product that I had tested was working well. I ended up traveling to South Africa to test it in the clinics. I ended up going to Vietnam to do the same thing. And Stanford being in the Silicon Valley, I ended up, the whole system and project ended up being spun out as a startup, which now has turned into a public benefit company. So in a nutshell, that's sort of my journey to how I landed at Stanford. And now, of course, I'm at Harvard and the Broad Institute.
Wow. So one thing that I would say I probably took away the most from kind of you sharing your path was the key role of mentors along the way. And each institution, starting at Mesa through Harvard, right, you described a person who was instrumental in supporting your research, supporting you personally. Anyway, I just think that that's such an important message for our students to hear, is nurturing those relationships can obviously be pivotal in believing in yourself and believing in your future and kind of setting up those opportunities. So I'm really glad that you shared that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's something that I always emphasize. Mentors and teachers and sponsors and even peer mentors are instrumental in being able to advance in a career that is so collegial, right? Academia is so collegial. You rely on your collaborators and your friends to help you do your homework or to know where the next opportunity is coming from. It's absolutely essential.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. So next question, because I know you kind of touched on a little bit of the research that you're doing and kind of some of the traveling that you did to do some testing, is a huge part of your research is this idea of having a more diverse pool. And I'd love if you could share more about maybe why is that important that we have more diverse, applicant pools, and why is that such an important focus for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So here at Harvard, I'm working on a few projects that are related to diversifying the pool of um, participants that donate samples that we then study at institutions like the Broad Institute or Harvard to have a better understanding of our human health and what maybe we can do better drug discovery and maybe better diagnostics and things like that. Um, and and people, the genome, the DNA of people is commonly shared at a high degree, but there is a small amount that is variable across populations, and this is generally to be believed to land somewhere around continental populations. So there will be some variability within, say, the African continent, and then there's some variability within the Asia continent, and there is also variability across continents. Um, and for the past 20 years, since we've sort of, decoded the first human genome in 2000, most of the studies that we've done have mostly focused on people of European descent. And that hasn't really translated well in downstream medical applications. And so there are that, these differences and the lack of understanding of people of other, of other backgrounds, genetic backgrounds, may actually affect the health disparities that we see in hospitals, including the sort of misunderstandings of the environmental conditions that individuals of these other backgrounds are not are living in. And that for someone like me, that's very important. I'm a Black woman. I was born in Burundi. I immigrated here. And the idea that uh, a lot of my genetic background or even my environmental exposure as I was living is something that isn't part of the majority of literature, scientific studies, makes me feel a little awkward and a little sad, to be honest, because then it makes me question whether medicine is for me. And so, of course, when I became, when I was given the privilege and opportunity to be at a place like the Broad and at Harvard University, this was a problem that I wanted to tackle. And I did the same when I was in grad school. When I was choosing what problem I wanted to tackle, I chose tuberculosis, which at the time was actually the most lethal infectious disease. Of course, it was before COVID. And now with COVID and the advent of precision medicine, I think the future of medicine will be more specialized to people. And if we leave certain groups behind, particularly people of color behind, then that will be translating in health disparities in hospitals.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important point for our students to hear, right? Because a lot of them are at that stage in high school trying to figure out, what do I want to do in college? What type of college do I want to go to? What types of programs do colleges offer? And I think that for them to understand that so much of the research that informs health and medicine, if it's based on studying people who are primarily of European descent, you're right. There's something sad, there's something uncomfortable about the idea that somehow now that can apply to everybody. So, this idea, I think, is really important for people to know that it's still an issue today. So, if there are areas of research that they think are really interesting or really passionate about, instead of feeling like, oh, someone's already done this before, they can check and see, well, has someone done this before with this specific group of people with this specific background? Because unfortunately, it sounds like the answer is probably no, it hasn't been done. So again, that gives them an opportunity to maybe discover a niche or an area that they could be really passionate about.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, great. Um, so next, I'd like for you to share a little bit more about what it was like to found a biotech company, right? I mean, you were kind of by Silicon Valley. I guess it was kind of a natural thing that you would end up, in that role. But maybe if you could share a little bit more about what your product does and how kind of your work in tuberculosis has been really influential.
Yeah. How did I start a company? I never thought I would, first of all. Um, I so I guess I have to talk about the product itself and what it does. When I was in graduate school, early on deciding what projects I wanted to work on, I knew right away that I wanted to do infectious diseases because of my background, my personal interest. And at the time, tuberculosis, TB, was the number one infectious killer at the time. And where I come from in Burundi, TB was a thing that people feared. And I knew that the way they test TB, and they still do today, um, is using a technology that was developed like in the early 1900s, like more than 100 years ago. And there hadn't been any new technology that can be easily implemented in places that needed the most. And so when I was thinking about a project that I wanted to tackle, sort of the technologies that were easily available to me at Berkeley, I connected, and this is another example of where good mentors are important. I connected with Carolyn Bertozzi, who's a chemist turned chemical biologist turned biologist, who embraced my vision. I sort of told her I have an applied side that I like and that I want to develop. This is an area of study that I want to choose and I want to flourish in. And her and I was sat down and we sort of concocted this crazy idea of creating these small chemical molecules that could potentially be used as a new diagnostics. Um, Long story short, we didn't think it was going to work. It did work, and it worked wonderfully well. And the molecules themselves are stable enough that you don't need to put them in the fridge, and you don't need to like protect them too much, so they can be shipped easily and readily around the world, and they work on their own, so there's minimal processing, and so really anyone could do the test, which is sort of the main features that I was looking for. And then I was going through the years and getting closer to my graduation date, and I had this product. I had all these collaborations around the world, and I was wondering like, what am I gonna do? What are the options for me? And we're at Stanford, and my advisors sort of the first meeting, like 2 years before I graduated, she mentioned, oh, we could always have a startup. That's one way to sort of take this on in the future. And I kid you not, I was like, no way. I think of all the startup founders. Nobody looks like me for sure. And I have no clue how people do it. I have no clue how to fundraise. I have no clue how to pitch. All that stuff. It was such a foreign world for me. And so I will say it took about 6 months for her to keep like seeding that idea in my head and me like maybe getting comfortable with it for a minute. And then eventually I started connecting with other like entrepreneurship minded students around campus, and there's many at Stanford. And in fact, there are even like startup incubators and community that I could tap into. And I essentially just sort of the last year of my PhD was essentially me running around and learning how to start a company, learning how to pitch, learning how to fundraise, learning how to do business finances, and figuring out how much it will cost and what's the market value and things, crazy things like that. Um, which was a fun experience, I have to say. and and I was lucky to find few people who believed in infectious disease at the time. So you have to remember this was pre-COVID. Before COVID, most people, especially in affluent places, really didn't think about infectious diseases that much. And most of them actually thought it was a problem of the past or a problem of the poor. And so there was no money to be made, or it wasn't important. Um, and so at the time, we actually struggled. We struggled a little bit to get attention, to get funding, and we ended up, luckily, we ended up getting the attention of the Gates Foundation, who seeded our first like couple of years after I graduated. And so through that, we were able to like continue. And now the company, is a big company, is going through hiring rounds, and with COVID, COVID has definitely given the spotlight to infectious diseases and how important they are. And so now we're doing much better.
Yeah, that's great. It was interesting too to learn more about kind of the process of building the company, and then how something that was unrelated, right? The whole experience we've all had with COVID in the past year has shed a light on infectious disease and the importance of studying it and the importance of addressing the needs of communities, which are really all communities. So yeah, that's really interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and welcome Dr. Raymond now. And then if it's okay, Dr. Kamariza, if you could just pause for us and then maybe come back in a little bit, we're going to do a Q&A with all of our students at the end. So thank you. Hi, Dr. Raymond. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Perfect. Doing well, thanks. Thank you again for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for the invite.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I feel like Dr. Kamariza kind of warmed us up to, science, and that it can be very complicated, but also very important in an applied way. And so your research is also, very advanced. So I'm hoping maybe, can you start by just breaking it down kind of for a lay person, like what is the research that you do and how is it, applied in a way that's critical for our society?
Yeah, so thank you. So first of all, thanks for the invite. It's always nice to come on and talk with potential scientists about what a life in science could look like. And so at the Broad, I'm a research scientist, and what I do is we try to discover small molecules that we could use to treat disease. And the way that we search for new drugs has changed significantly. So in the past, what usually happened is somebody would discover a compound which had an impact in some disease, right? So maybe like aspirin or something like that. And we had no idea how it worked. So eventually we figured out that most drugs had the effect by interacting with a specific protein in the body. And so as time went on, the way that we search for drugs kind of changed, where instead of just trying to find a compound which affects a disease, we actually try to figure out which protein was misbehaving in some specific disease. And then when you have that information, then you could go after that specific protein using a targeted approach of drug discovery. And what that does is it kind of gives you a more fine-tuned response to the drug discovery challenge. And what that does is it eventually leads to less side effects and less complications. And what I do specifically is I work as part of a large team and a very large collaboration where essentially what I do is I kind of create a blueprint of that protein. So I use X-ray crystallography. And in the end, I get like a very detailed 3-dimensional blueprint of the protein. And what I do is after my team has found specific compounds which interact with that protein, I see how those different compounds interact with the protein. And then you could see exactly how each atom in the compound is interacting with each atom in the protein. And what that enables us to do is we could actually go in and fine tune that compound to actually make it interact with that protein even more specifically. And then, so basically in the end, what you get is a very high potent, highly effective compound, which will inhibit that protein. And then in the end, which will hopefully negate the disease. So that's kind of like in a nutshell what I do. It's pretty complex. There's a lot of moving parts, but in essence, I just kind of take make three-dimensional blueprints of the protein.
And then is that used for all diseases, or do you focus on one specific disease?
Yeah. So my background is in infectious disease. So I have a pretty similar story to the previous speaker, where I grew up in the Caribbean in a very small island called St. Lucia, and we have lots of infectious diseases because it's a tropical country. So I've always been interested in infectious disease, and all through college and in my PhD, I worked exclusively on viruses, and also in my postdoc, I worked on the influenza vaccine because I was interested in making the vaccine even better. So since moving to the Broad, we've had some issues, just as the previous speaker mentioned, of getting some of our infectious disease, this is pre-COVID, getting some of our infectious disease projects funded because they were mostly, in Africa, and then, usually when you create drugs for Africans, it's charity because there's no money. So what I've been working on projects involved in Crohn's disease, which is IBD disease, so intestinal bowel disease, and also some cancer programs. So with these projects at the Broad, we use our genetic sequencing capabilities to identify which proteins are responsible for those diseases. And then when we have these proteins, then we have a full-fledged effort to kind of figure out exactly what's wrong with the protein in those diseases and how we could fix it. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to get a blueprint of the protein. So that's kind of like where I come on board. But with me specifically, what I really enjoy doing is working on the really challenging and difficult projects. So we have a lot of projects and they're all difficult, but I especially like and specifically choose to work on the most difficult ones that many people have tried in the past but weren't able to crack. So I like to bring my unique set of skills and experiences to those kind of problems, to look at them in a different way, because I think outside the box, and then usually I'm able to kind of bring something that's unique to the project, and I'm able to actually succeed in ways that other people haven't. And the Broad is a great place to do this kind of things because the Broad, everything we do at the Broad is big. It's always big and challenging stuff. So I really enjoy working at the Broad, and really enjoy working on my very difficult, challenging projects, even though they might be very frustrating at times. But in the end, if you do succeed, then it has a huge impact on millions of health, the health of millions of people.
Sure. Well, it sounds like your work, while challenging at times, is obviously really rewarding. And it also sounds like your path, you've been very focused kind of throughout your educational studies, kind of going back to your experience in the Caribbean and kind of what you witnessed there, and how that inspired you to want to address challenges that you saw in your community. Did you have a similar experience as Dr. Kamariza, like where you had a key mentor along the way, or have you felt like you've been generating a lot of your path yourself? Kind of maybe share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so growing up in the Caribbean, because I'm from St. Lucia, right? It's 20 miles long and 14 miles wide, and it's all jungle in the middle. And I think growing up, there were about 150,000 people on the island. So not many people. We had no major industries. We had no scientific research going on. And but I did have some really good teachers in school, and I kind of felt isolated sometimes, because being on a small island in the middle of the ocean, you kind of feel isolated. But what really interested me in science was reading science fiction. So I was a prodigious reader, so I read everything, especially science fiction. And so that's kind of how I learned about the role that scientists play in discovering new things. And I've always had an interest in figuring out how things work, because I think if you know how something works, then you could actually make changes to make it work even better. So initially, while I did have some pretty good inspirational teachers, it was mostly it was just my interest and my curiosity, which drove me and kind of led me towards science. And I wanted to be a doctor initially, because that's kind of all I knew, because we had doctors on the island, and that's kind of like all I knew about the scientists. And I thought you need an MD to do science. But it wasn't until I went to college in Philly and I worked in a lab for the summer after my freshman year, that I really realized that the lab is where I really want to be. that's where I think I could have the greatest impact. And I had a great mentor that first year, Dr. Kaczynski at Temple, and he took me into his lab and taught me all the basics. And he kept me on for 3 additional summers. So I was in the lab pretty much every summer, and sometimes during the different semesters of the school year for my whole time at Temple. And it was great, and he had great postdocs in his lab and great lab managers. And when I went to Michigan, for the first year, you have to kind of rotate in different labs, trying to find which one is the best fit for you. And I picked a lab with Janet Smith, and she was just an awesome mentor in every single way. And she was just, I can't even explain how, she was just good in every single thing. And it was like this best 6 years of my life in grad school. I don't know if, it was just great. And I was working on like things I wanted to work on that were very, very challenging. And she actually encouraged me. And sometimes I was, she wasn't really working on the stuff I really wanted to work on. So she would find collaborators that I could work with to actually, just to kind of make sure that I could actually pursue my dreams. And then when I went to Harvard, I worked with Steve Harrison, who was a great mentor. He's a classical crystallographer. He's been at Harvard since the 60s. He came there as an undergrad and he's still there. And he does old school crystallography. And that's something that they don't teach anymore, is old school crystallography, because now it's so automated. But the thing with having all this automation is that if something goes wrong, it's kind of difficult to kind of diagnose the problem because it's all automated. But because Steve is so old school, he taught me how to kind of pass out every single part of the problem in crystallography and really understand what's going on. And I think that's why I'm able to take on these projects where people have tried and they haven't done it, because I could actually take it on, look at it from a different lens, and then really dive in and figure out what the problem is, diagnose it, fix it, and then kind of everything that's working. So I think by having those different kind of mentors who each taught me different things, I'm able to use that experience to really apply it to all the projects I work on at the Broad.
Yeah, that's great. So we have some amazing questions that have come into the Q&A. So Dr. Kamariza, if you're still there, if you can turn on your camera and microphone and rejoin us, I'll ask this question. Maybe Dr. Raymond, you can start answering while she comes back. What can a student who is still in high school do to set themselves up for this type of career? What advice would you have for high schoolers?
I mean, so in high school, so there are programs that you could apply to. And so, for example, at the Broad, we have different programs for high school and college students. And I think I've had a couple high school students, and they were spectacular. And so there are things you could do as a high schooler to actually, prep yourself up for career in science. And the easiest thing to do is, because sometimes you really want to be something, and when you actually do it, then you don't feel like doing it anymore. So if you really want to be a scientist, I encourage you to try and spend some time in a lab. So either by maybe like a couple days in the lab, or if you want to do one of these programs where you get to spend 8 weeks in the lab, you could try that and see if you really like it. Because the thing about science is most of the things, since everything you work on is new, it's completely new, nobody's ever done it before, especially what you're working on. It's things don't always work. Most times they fail actually. But so you have to go in the lab, try one of those projects, see if you like this kind of trial and error type situation, and see if that's something because some people just can't handle that. They just can't handle the failure that happens in the lab. But for me, I think every time something doesn't work, I learn something, and I could redesign my experiment using what I learned and then make it better. And eventually, I will. It's very small incremental steps, and if you don't have the spine for that, then science may not be the best thing for you. So one thing is just stay focused on your science curriculum at school. To try and find somebody to actually let you spend some time in the lab, just to see what it's like to be a scientist, and 3, also to see if you have the resolve and the stick-to-itiveness that you need to actually succeed on one of those challenging projects in the lab.
Yeah, we always talk about science as trial and error, right? There's error. We have to learn from it and then make changes and then build on what we're learning to keep getting better and better.
I mean, it's not really error. It's just like, you know, there's like you're trying to discover something that has never
Sure.
been discovered before, and it takes time to really understand what's going on, because most times we have an incomplete view of nature, and then but you learn things with each step, and then and then you kind of like fine tune your hypothesis, and then eventually you'll get it. But it's just very, very small steps. But you have to be dedicated to it.
Sure. And Dr. Kamariza, anything for you to add, kind of advice for high schoolers to set themselves up for success?
I mean, I would just echo Dr. Raymond's comments, that the ability to just try something. So putting yourself in a scientific environment, learning how the community functions and works, and the whole trial and error system, that also is a real thing. It's a acquired behavior to learn through mistakes. It's not a natural process for us. And also get to know people and get to know how people function, and maybe get mentors that will write you those letters of recommendation when you apply to college. All those things are important, and it's something that students can do right now in high school.
Yeah. And you both talked about mentors, right, and the role of mentorship. But I think it's important for students to hear kind of what you had to do to earn that relationship with a mentor, right? So you had to work really hard. You had to demonstrate interest. You had to be invested and responsible. Like, if you can maybe share a little bit more about advice for the high schoolers on the call, what they should be doing if they are looking to build these types of mentors and relationships, either in high school or college or beyond. Maybe Dr. Kamariza, you want to go first, and then we can go to Dr. Raymond.
Yeah, that's a very good question. What did I do to earn the mentors that I have? That's a tough question for me, because you never feel like you fully deserve something. But I guess now that I'm a mentor myself, I will say that mentors in general are always open to mentor other students and trainees. The relationship, however, has to be one that works for both ends. So you have to identify a mentor that sees you, that understands what you need, that understands where you're going, and is able to help you get there, and is willing to work with you during tough times. Just the other day, I was talking to someone, and someone said it beautifully. They said, you know, you want to choose a mentor who you'd go to in your darkest hour, not on your happiest hour. And so someone you're comfortable with, someone you're comfortable going to when that experiment is not working, or whether you're getting a rejection letter, or, you know, where some door is closing in front of you, and they can help you brainstorm and think of alternative paths for you.
Dr. Raymond, anything you want to add about mentorship?
Yeah. So I've been privileged that the last 3 jobs I've had an opportunity to kind of like interview different people and then pick someone I really like. So I remember in grad school, you know, the first year you interview different, you know, mentors to see, or different PIs to see which lab you might want to join. And I remember, you know, like while I was having this discussion, I'd be like, is this somebody I could actually become friends with? You know, is this somebody I could, like, you know, like Dr. Kamariza said, is this somebody I could go to when I have like a lot of problems? Can I really enjoy being with this person for the next few years? And I think when I interviewed Janet Smith, who was my eventual mentor, I mean, she clicked all of these boxes. And I think in grad school, some people tend to pick a lab based on the work that's been done in the lab, and I think that could be a mistake, because, you know, because projects change, but your mentor doesn't. So I think you should always pick first the mentor, and then the work will come afterwards. And also through my postdoc, I had 3 different, you know, potential labs that were interested in me, and I picked Steve because I thought that, like, first of all, I could become his friend, and we could be good friends, and we could work well together, but also that I could, you know, learn, you know, specific things on the way that he did things. And then also when I was looking for a job, I actually had different interviews, and I actually picked some, like my current supervisor is just awesome, and he's great, and he's supportive, and he's a good friend of mine. and we work really well together. And he he understands how I work, because I work a little differently than most people, and he's okay with it. And I think a mentor is more like a guide, because everybody has potential, and the mentor's job, because he has a little more experience, the mentor's job is to just help each person find a path to get to where they want to go. And usually you could see, and you could kind of get a sense of if that person is going to be a good mentor by just speaking with them and spending some time with them. And so so I would say, try and find somebody that you could speak with, that you could have a good connection with, and somebody who could help you out, when it gets really rough, and it will get pretty rough. So so that's kind of all I have to add to that.
Yeah, that's great. So we have a lot of amazing questions that were put in the Q&A. It's hard for me to have to just pick one more before we wrap up today, but I think this question is really great. It's about, what are the top qualities or skills that you think or that you see in successful students, right? You both talked about how you were mentored along the way, and now you are mentors yourselves. What are those things that stick out to you in the, high school students or college students whom you mentor? Maybe Dr. Raymond, go ahead, and then we can end with Dr. Kamariza.
Yeah, so so in all my time as a mentor, and I've been doing this since grad school, I think there are two kinds of kids, especially the younger kids. So there are some kids who think they want to be a scientist, maybe because their parents are scientists or whatever, and they think like, oh, well, my grandmother's a biochemist, my grandfather's a biochemist, my mom's a biochemist, I have to be a biochemist. And then they come to the lab and they're like, I don't want to be a biochemist, I want to be an art music, whatever. So one thing you could tell almost immediately is the level of enthusiasm the kids have for the work that has to be done. And I've been pretty fortunate in that I've had some really great, mentees, and especially the high school students, because they come in and they so, because just by being in a lab, it shows that they really want to do it. Like they especially those from the underrepresented minorities, or those from not privileged backgrounds, like, because they work so hard to get to the lab, and then when they get there, you could see that they really want to try, and they try and they try. And so it's so one thing that I would say you need is just to like do you enjoy doing the work? Because if you enjoy doing the work, then it doesn't seem like work. It just seems like having fun every day. Like, for example, like when I go to work, it's like going to like have fun every day, and because I really enjoy it, even though it's difficult. So some kids come in, and then they have that curiosity, and they enjoy the work. They enjoy working on problems, challenging problems, and they're just curious. So curiosity is probably one of like the biggest thing, because you have to be curious to be a scientist. And then the other thing I think is essential to be a scientist is you need to have the grit. Because like I said, things will fail every single time. Like, no experiment works the first time, and so you need that grit to be like, okay, I did this experiment, I did ABC, it failed. What can I change so that next time when I perform the experiment, I will probably succeed. And then, so you need to have that foresight to kind of see the end, and kind of realize that there will be challenges along the way. And then, but then you could, but then you have to kind of like plow through those challenges to actually make it to where you want to be. So curiosity, grit, and you need to be a good collaborator also in science. Like you can't be a loner in science anymore, because it's just, the problems are just too complex. So you need to be able to work as a team. So curiosity, grit, and collaborative skills.
That's great. Dr. Kamariza, anything that you want to add to end us out today, those skills that you're looking for in students?
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Raymond said many of the skills. I think him and I are similar mentors. What I would say is, I came from a non-traditional background, so there were a lot of the profile that they used to use before to select mentees. I didn't quite match that, and so it took someone to have sort of a different understanding of what it takes to succeed in science to believe in me. And ultimately, when I thought about this, I think the main driver of success in anything, not just in science, is passion. Like Dr. Raymond said, whether you love what you do and honesty in your passion. There's a lot of influence, external influence that we can get. People can push you one direction, and or others can push you in another direction. But if you're not being honest with yourself and whether you actually like the work that you're doing, it won't be a pleasant experience for life. And life is too short for that, at least in my view. So my successful mentees are those that really enjoy the work that we do together, and we can sit down and brainstorm, other directions that we can go, maybe interesting things, wild ideas that nobody has thought about before, and actually just really have fun with it. Like Dr. Raymond said, it can be an enjoyable experience if you have that curiosity and that creativity. And I think the other important point to stress that I will echo Dr. Raymond that he said is the ability to be a good peer to other scientists. It really does take a village. Like with COVID, we were able to find multiple vaccines under a year. That's not because there was one extremely smart person who came up with that. It took thousands of scientists who came together and sort of brainstorm the best way to do this the most efficiently and the quickest way to get it to people. And so being able to collaborate with other people and appreciate other people's intelligence and differences is also a big part of being successful.
Yeah, and one thing too that I like about what both of you shared is for the students joining us who are maybe going to be seniors next year or applying to college, kind of looking for those opportunities, is that everything that you shared about what you look for in these skills, that's what colleges are looking for, right? When they're creating their classes, they're looking for students who are going to collaborate with others, who are going to be enthusiastic, who are going to be intellectually curious, who are going to be engaged in these stimulating conversations and working with others, right? So these skills are great for scientists, right? But they're also just great for everyone. So I just want to stress that it's not limited just to those pursuing science, because really I think all of those qualities that you emphasize and really focus on in the students you mentor are just great characteristics for students to showcase about themselves when they're applying for jobs or applying for college. Well, again, I hate to cut us off with so many great questions lingering in the Q&A, but I do just want to thank you both so much for your time. It was wonderful to connect with you. Again, thank you so much to the Broad Institute and Young Women in Bio for working with us to reach out to both of you to share your time and your expertise. For the students who are joining us, we do have a little bit of a break till our next panel, which looks like it starts in about 25 minutes. So just remember, if you're supposed to go back and reconnect with your teacher to do some reflection, make sure that you remember to do that in between. And then our impact panel starts in about 25 minutes. And we do have the person who is responsible for social responsibility for the NBA joining us. So for all of you basketball fans out there, it should be a really great time. So again, Dr.
Thank you for having us.
Can I say one thing?
Of course.
Before we end? So if anyone wants to kind of, I know there are like 300 kids on here, but if anyone wants to get in touch with me, can you get in touch with Jennifer and see if, and then she could kind of forward it to me?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we can work with all the teachers who coordinated things today with their students. And if any of them reach out and ask if there's a way that they can connect with you, we can definitely pass that on.
Cool.
Yeah, likewise. Feel free to connect.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, both of you. That's really wonderful. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Bye-bye.